Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I hope everybody is well caffeinated for the rest of this morning's events before lunch. I'm so happy to have Todd Brady from Intel and Kathleen McLaughlin from Walmart with us today to talk about the role of the private sector. The private sector is playing an increasingly pivotal role in addressing climate change after President Trump announced that the United States would withdraw from the Paris Agreement, which, by the way, hasn't happened yet. I had a lot of questions last night at dinner, and I think maybe there's still some confusion about whether the US is indeed still out of the Paris Agreement, or yet out of the Paris Agreement. But after that happened, you know, it wasn't just cities and states that said we're still in. It was businesses like Intel and Walmart. What does that mean for businesses like yours? What does we're still in mean for you?
Well, for Intel, we are still in. It is really how we do business. So for us, it was a very easy decision, I guess, if you will, in terms of continuing to focus on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, because it's simply ingrained into what we do. A lot of people may not realize, but actually, as Intel, we worked with the rest of the semiconductor industry back in 1998, so almost 20 years ago now, to develop a voluntary memorandum of understanding with the US EPA to voluntarily reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So it's 20 years ago. So that work has progressed to today and includes, you know, reducing our greenhouse gases from our manufacturing operations as a large manufacturer. It includes energy efficiency. It includes investments in renewable energy, and on and on. And the reason we do that is because we firmly believe that it makes good business sense. For every dollar that my team invests in energy savings, we get a return on our investment, typically on average in 3 years or less. Why wouldn't we continue to do that, which in turn then reduces our greenhouse gas emissions? As we invest in renewables, nearly all of the power purchase agreements that we have negotiated allow us to get energy at or below cost of what we are currently buying energy for. Again, why wouldn't we do that? And then, of course, there's the broader ethical issue of is it the right thing to do, and we absolutely believe it is the right thing to do as well.
And so, Kathleen, I mean, you know, as Tom was alluding to, I mean, major corporations like both of yours have become some of America's biggest buyers of renewable energy. Some of these power purchases are enormous, are transforming the markets and the grid. Tell me about the profit of power purchases. What's in it for Walmart to make these kinds of big power purchases in renewable energy?
Yeah, well, you know, similar to Tom and Intel, working on climate is a business issue. It's not a CSR thing or something we do through philanthropy or what have you. This is critical, and one of our big points of advocacy is to dispel this notion that there's somehow a false trade-off between the environment and business. These things go hand in hand. It's true for social issues too. And the leading companies today recognize that they're going to maximize their shareholder value by fundamentally rewiring the environmental and social systems that we rely on. And so climate energy, that's one of them. Renewable energy is a really important plank in our strategy. We have many others: sustainable agriculture, waste reduction, packaging, deforestation, consumer product innovation, and so on. But when it comes to renewables, our goal is to get to 100% renewable energy across our network globally. We're only at about 23, 24% today, 25%. In the US, it's even lower. And the reason it's lower is a lot of the conversations that were had on this stage, you know, earlier today: the regulatory environment, the pricing environment, the infrastructure, technology, and so on. So in the US, we're only at about 12, 13%. Purchasing PPAs, that's one way we do it. We did a big deal in Texas with Logan's Gap and wind power. We have a massive installed base of solar on our own stores. You know, I think in the last 4 years, we've been #1 in the country for on-site installations, 3 out of the 4 years, and that's something we'll continue to do. And it's sort of by hook or by crook. Wherever we can, whatever state we're in across our network, we try to drive more and more renewables.
Well, I want to drill down into the regulatory issue, but let me just pause and say that I love the system that my colleague Katie imposed in the last panel of taking questions throughout the discussion, because we have such a dynamic audience. So as you have questions, please just raise your hand. I will keep an eye out in the audience. We have folks with microphones roaming around, and we'll take questions throughout the session, so we don't leave it for a few minutes at the end. What gets us past that 12, 13%? What does Walmart need to move past that barrier?
There are many things. So we are one of the supporters of the renewable energy buyers principles that World Wildlife Fund developed with a number of partners. I think you guys were involved in those conversations too. And I imagine most people in the room are familiar with that, and if you're not, check it out online. But it lays out sort of 9 key principles, and there are many. So for example, direct access. We'd like to purchase power directly from the providers, and we can't do that in every state. Government subsidies and investments. We'd like to see a level playing field where the cost of energy reflects the true cost, the total cost, and that would even up, in terms of affordability of renewables versus fossil fuels in many places. So those are just a couple of examples. Regulatory requirements around permitting to do on-site installation. Sometimes there are hurdles that we have to go through there that delay our ability to install in our own site. So any manner of things.
Yeah, and
the same general.
Yeah, I would add to that. We also, as does Walmart, have operations internationally as well, and we run into some challenges there. So in the U.S. and in Europe now, 100% of the energy that we use is renewable, but we get there through RECs, is how we get there today, because of some of the items which you touched on that we can't, there may not be another direct way of achieving that 100%. So as a result, we are the largest purchaser of green power in the U.S., probably have been, I think, now for the last 8 or 9 years, because we have large manufacturing operations in the U.S. which are energy intensive. And those are 100% renewable. But in other locations around the world, those same mechanisms don't exist. The access to the energy markets is different. And so we have to work country by country on many of the principles which have been referred to try to make that available for us. But we are seeing progress in those areas.
I saw a hand in the back. Yes.
Hi, Amber Mahone with E3. So you've talked about electricity, but I was wondering if you could give us your vision for transportation and maybe give us a little bit of background of kind of what went into the Tesla semi-truck pilot decision, and kind of where you see the future of transportation for your companies.
Yeah. Well, so we're really excited about the prospect of renewables in our fleet. So Walmart is in 28 countries. Most of those countries we actually work with third-party fleets, but the US we actually own our own fleet. And we worked over about 10-year period to double our fleet efficiency and reduce the reliance on fossil fuel. And we were able to do that. It was very difficult. It was a combination of modifying driver behavior and providing them feedback about gear shifting and average speed. It was redesigning engines with Peterbilt and Cummins for more fuel efficiency, redesigning the cab, changing the way we load the back of the truck, changing the packaging. It was a whole route optimization, right? The way they drive and drop off their loads. So a whole number of things that we had to do. And we were able to do it. So we doubled the fleet efficiency. That's great. However, we still use a lot of fuel. So yeah, we just did an arrangement with Tesla to invest in a number of trucks with them, electrified vehicles, and we're excited to experiment with them, pilot this. We do envision a world where our fleet is run completely on renewable energy, and we think this is an exciting step that allows us to experiment with that. We had done an early step forward with a concept truck that we built that was more of a hybrid drivetrain, but this takes it even further. So we're excited about it.
Yeah, and so we're equally excited from a different angle, which is all of, whether it's Tesla or any of these autonomous vehicles, have a ton of technology in them. And we see that as a huge opportunity for our business. So when we talk about climate change as well, I think there are not only what are we doing about our operations, but how does moving to a low carbon, zero carbon economy, what business opportunities are there? And we see opportunities as Intel in that space. So we've made heavy investments in autonomous vehicles, investments in, what are the technologies that can give us a smarter infrastructure, smarter buildings, smarter homes, all of those things, which in turn can lead to higher efficiencies and a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions.
You know, one of the things I think about and wonder about sometimes is at what point do the business models that companies like yours are leading start to change the politics? And I wonder what you're seeing. I mean, as you decarbonize and move towards renewable energy in your operations, you know, around the country, what, if any, impact is that having on policymakers' attitudes toward not just renewable energy, but climate change? Is there a shift, or is that not happening yet?
Our approach has been to weave emissions reduction into business and just to make it naturally part of what we do. Our customers care about it, and part of it's responding to what they'd like to see. But what we've tried to do is we became one of the first retailers, I think maybe still the only retailer, to sign on to science-based targets, the science-based reductions in emissions. So the Scope 1 and Scope 2 we've been talking about, fleet, our buildings and so on, that's obviously a big part of our own Scope 1 and 2. But that is a tiny fraction of the emissions that come from retail. 90%, north of 90%, is the supply chain. It's agriculture, it's electronics companies, right? It's apparel, it's all of these things right back through the chain. So what we've tried to do is work with our suppliers. So as part of our science-based targets, we agreed to also tackle Scope 3. So we announced something called Project Gigaton, because when we added up all the emissions that we need to reduce to be in line with the science-based requirements for the 2-degree world, it's about a gigaton between 2015 and 2030 right across our supply chain. So we've asked all of our suppliers to join us and work together with folks like World Wildlife Fund, CDP, Environmental Defense Fund, Nature Conservancy, who are all partners in this, in very practical solutions in a number of areas. Sustainable agriculture, so we heard earlier about fertilizer optimization and so on. Waste reduction, food waste generates an enormous amount of emissions. Packaging reduction, consumer product innovation, so cold water wash or LED light bulbs, products like that. We heard about the meatless meat, you know, those kinds of things. Making them popular, making them accessible and affordable to customers, that's a big one. Deforestation, working on palm oil or Brazilian beef or paper, practical solutions that we as retailers and consumer companies can embed in our sourcing protocols, in how we go to market, so that we're driving emissions down and accelerating that. And again, there's a business case for this. Cost savings for sure, innovation. There are a lot of ancillary benefits that come along in terms of product quality and sales revenue and so on. It's not just about cost. So
bypassing the politics and
bypassing the politics, and I think somebody alluded to that earlier. What we find is by making that case, and we do talk to people at the federal and state level about this case, and anecdotally I'd say we're seeing a bit of a shift or a listening, but I think, you know, particularly in light of the withdrawal from the Paris Accord and so on, I wouldn't say the political winds are favorable to the climate agenda right now, but we're trying to make it practical and favorable just from a common sense point of view. So.
Yeah, I would echo that. We're taking a very similar approach. And you know, it's been interesting in my 20 years in the sustainability, environmental sustainability arena, it's been very interesting to see how things have evolved. And exactly what you articulated, where 20 years ago when I first started, most companies were primarily worried about what's going on within my fence line and the walls of my factories and whatnot. And then it was, well, what about my products? What impacts are my products having? And from an electronics company's perspective, we quickly realized our product footprint was far bigger, orders of magnitude bigger than our factory. What could we do to make our chips more energy efficient in our case? And that was a big focus. And then it was our supply chain. And then, so as you start working on these things, you go, well, wait a minute, now we've got our supply chain out there. What should we do about our supply chain? And then most recently, it's, wait, how can we think about this instead of all of these threats coming at us? Where's the opportunity? And what's the opportunity for our business to grow in this new environment? And I think that's a similar path that many companies are taking along that spectrum.
We're going to drill down into supply chain in a minute, but I saw there are two hands. One gentleman already has a microphone, and then a couple in front of him.
Thank you. Mike Milkey, Silicon Valley Leadership Group. If I might build on that question, Lisa, I'd like to, I think all the stuff that you're talking about is really important. Making the business case is really important. Making these public pronouncements is really important. But I'm really curious what these conversations are like, and what's the role of business in having these conversations at the federal level? Obviously, one party is very antagonistic to these issues. My presupposition is that that party is more inclined to listen to business when there is a business case to be made. What does that look like? Is there a role for business at the federal level and across the country in making this less toxic? And if so, what does that look like and how does that work?
That's a great question. Open to either of you.
Well, I think certainly businesses are talking. I know we're talking both as Intel and through our various trade associations, various electronic trade associations, because again, we see a low carbon economy as an opportunity as well. There have been a number of reports that have been published and shared with policymakers, not just here in the US, in Europe, in China, in other locations. So I think that dialogue is going on. Business is sharing the fact that we see that there's a strong business case for a focus on the environment.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo that. I think we've been very vocal, very public about our views on this. And at one stage, Doug McMillon, who's our CEO, was part of one of these business advisory councils. He was very vocal about it there as well. Sometimes people listen to your advice, sometimes they don't. And I think there are a lot of other issues at play, obviously, in the decisions that are getting made in Washington these days. So we've been vocal. We're clear about what we believe. We advocate for it. Sometimes it results in action. Sometimes it doesn't.
Well, I'm actually going to build on that question myself, because what I don't see in Washington, frankly, is, businesses are very vocal, and there is signing on to letters and urging, for example, the president to, for example, stay in the Paris Agreement. I don't see companies putting their political capital into addressing climate change. When I look at where lobbying dollars for companies, are going, it is not into talking about the Clean Power Plan, for example, the practical, the regulation that would have allowed us to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. So why is that so difficult? Is it that companies don't want to talk about climate change with a lawmaker who might be antagonistic to it, and you might need them on taxes, or something else? What is that solution?
Well, I actually think there is a fair amount of lobbying money that's going into these kinds of issues. But yeah, at any given moment, there are many, many issues at play. Trade, tax, DACA, all of these kinds of things. So our philosophy at Walmart is we weigh in publicly with lawmakers, with customers, with the media on things that do affect our customers, that affect our associates, as well as our business, and we're quite open about that, and we do. I just think that, as I said, you can lead the horse to water, you can't make him drink.
Right.
Yeah, and it can be frustrating. It's frustrating for many of us. It's frustrating for us at times. Then at the end of the day, you have to say, what can we do as a business? Well, we can focus on advancing our business. We can focus on making our business better for our shareholders. We can get in the middle of all the politics, or we can focus on, I think, what as business we're here for, which is to grow our businesses in a way that balances the impacts to the environment. And so I think that's where a lot of us go to is, this makes sense, we're going to go do it. We'll ignore some of the noise and focus on what we know makes sense to do as a business.
Let's go over here to the gentleman standing up.
Hello, I'm Peter Kalnay with the Climate Reality Project. And I'd like to ask the spokesperson for Walmart particularly, whether the good news, which is like preaching to the choir somewhat in an audience like this, might not be also transmitted to, cost-conscious customers, workers, etc., within your vast business.
Yeah, how do you communicate the solutions that you're working on to the people that shop in your stores and work there?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because people often say, well, you're Walmart, you can just talk to your customers. It's actually hard for us to talk to our customers about topics like this, so we can do an ad, and we have done that in the past. What we've tried to do is do it more at the shelf, right? So if people are actually in the aisles and they're buying a product, to communicate right there. So we did some experiments this last year with apparel where we have been working with mills to reduce the energy consumption and water consumption, to source sustainable cotton, more locally sourced, so from the Mississippi Delta, which also reduces transportation costs and so on. And so we did communicate to the customer around a whole line of t-shirts to say, look, these t-shirts are more sustainable in terms of 50% less energy, 40% less water, they're traceable cotton back to the Mississippi Delta, these kind of benefits. People really liked that. They responded to it, and we got great feedback from customers. So I think that's one thing we will try to do more of. We certainly do it in things like LED light bulbs or cold water wash and try to explain the benefits. So figuring out a way to do that, but then also have this umbrella messaging around why is it a good thing to reduce emissions? Why is it good for families? Why is it good for society? That's harder to do at that macro level, but it's something we continue to work on.
Do you find resistance or discomfort from customers and others when you talk about climate change, when you use the phrase climate change?
Not really. People have so many things on their mind, and there are certainly, there's some percentage of our population that still, denies climate change. They tend to just ignore it. We've never really had negative feedback about that. It's more what people pay attention to.
And both of you have talked about the targets that your companies have and talked about them in terms of science-based targets. I think one of the things that folks always want to know when it comes to businesses that have targets, whether it's the gigaton, is it the gigaton challenge? I'm going to ask you.
Project Gigaton.
Project Gigaton.
We started calling it the challenge, and our suppliers said, that's not very inspiring. Can we call it something else? Because we want to feel excited about it. So it is a challenge, though, to be clear.
What is the level of transparency? What do you, how do people know that you are doing what you say you're doing?
Yeah, I think like most companies, so we do that several ways. One, we publish an annual report, corporate responsibility report, where we outline our progress towards our goals and whatnot. Recently, within the past few years, we've also created a website, exploreintel.com, where you can go and look at any of our major manufacturing operations around the globe and drill down specifically on that particular operation, look at its carbon footprint, carbon emissions, water, waste generation, whatever. So we've tried to be, and that's updated quarterly, so you don't have to wait for an annual report. You can go look quarterly at what each and every facility is doing, if you're interested in one particular near you or whatever. And so I think making information available, we're very strong believers in being as transparent as possible with this information.
And for Walmart?
Yeah, we believe the same. So we report through CDP and also in our annual
Carbon Disclosure Project?
Yes. And then through our annual sustainability report, we report our progress on emissions reduction, energy, and so on. And we'll be releasing more and more information. I think that's true across all issues, whether it's chemicals in products or emissions or issues around food safety. That desire for transparency coupled with technology, which makes it available, train's left the station. It's going to get more and more and more, which we're excited about. We need that to solve the problems.
Question over here.
Hi, Adam Stern with Actera, a Bay Area environmental group. What's the extent that your companies are using carbon pricing in your planning internally, and what do you see the value of that across corporate America?
Yeah, we're actually, so in the EU, for example, where we operate under the EU emission trading scheme, similar here in California. We have not set an internal price on carbon. However, as we do look at many of the projects that we focus on, I mentioned earlier, we get about a 3-year ROI already without even factoring in an internal price on carbon, just looking at our electricity costs. So that's been our primary focus.
I'd say as a society, we're going to need some type of carbon pricing mechanism to help us achieve our emissions goals. Within Walmart, we don't use that kind of scheme because we've all agreed that we're going to reduce emissions. We have very aggressive targets, and we've lined out exactly how we'll get there. So we don't need a carbon pricing to help us make the right trade-offs to get there. We've already built it into our plans.
And I guess I'll just wrap up by asking, do we need a regulatory effort to help businesses meet their goals?
Well, I mean, I think us, as well as many businesses, one of the reasons we said, you know, we're still in is one of the things we like to have as businesses is certainty. And the Climate Accord, the Paris Agreement, one of the things that brings for us is certainty. We know what the rules are, we know the target that we're trying to get to. We're a global company, we operate all around the world. And so wherever we can, we like to have that certainty, a level playing field wherever we operate. And I think that's a strong business case, if you will, for you know, staying in the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, I would agree. And you know, the other thing that Paris does is it gets everyone to the table. We can't solve emissions or climate as a planet unless we're all working together. And you know, that signaling power is critical. And that's one of the reasons that we were so you know, staying with the cause and really advocating for this "we're still in" movement. We think we need to show the rest of the world that there is still critical mass of American companies and states and cities and nonprofits and so on that are all working on this, you know, to drive it forward.
Well, thank you both so much. It was a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for your excellent questions, and thank you.
Thank you.